For startups hiring engineers and engineers looking to join them, this podcast is for you.
Hi, welcome to Your Next Tech Startup. I'm host Isabel Rasmussen. Today we are going to be speaking about one of the most commonly read complaints I see in feedback forms about interviews, and that is what candidates are or are not asking the person that is interviewing them during the interview process. Today we are going to be speaking with Maher about his experiences, what he recommends ICs and managers and engineering directors are asking during their interview processes. Tell us a little bit about yourself and background.
Hi, Isabel. Thank you so much for having me on your podcast. Very excited to be here. Yeah, so my name is Maher. I'm currently the Senior VP of Engineering at Betterworks. I lead the engineering team there. We are building good stuff as a software as a service platform in HR tech with a lot of AI. So very good time to be building this. I've been in the Silicon Valley for the last 10 years, mainly in management position, leadership as a CTO, SVP or VP of engineering, leading teams, globally distributed, remote and hybrid and all of these kind of combinations. Yeah, I'm very passionate about technology. I was myself like an IC before, so I did a lot of the work myself and I learned the craft. And now leading team is obviously a different kind of work, but it's within the same kind of perspective of like achieving success, achieving performance and delivering on the business goals. I'm so excited to be here, and I know we have a lot of topics to cover, especially when it comes to hiring and building the successful engineering teams.
Yes. And curious, I always like to hear from guests. I've conducted I don't know how many thousands of interviews, but I'm always, one of the first person to talk to someone. And you are probably also in the thousands at this point in your career of interviews?
Yeah, maybe high hundreds. I'm not sure about thousands. So
Okay.
I didn't keep count, but high number. Yeah, for sure.
And these days you're predominantly interviewing principal architect at an IC level or manager, director, senior director of engineering for leadership roles. Is that right?
Correct. Yeah.
Okay.
My focus, my direct reports are very senior, either managers or ICs. That's where I spent most of my time to ensure, building the right structure for the org. These people over time are responsible for hiring the other levels down from there.
Okay, so let's start with ICs. I do predominantly, probably 80% of my hiring has been IC. Oftentimes, the ones who are most likely to get to an end of an interview and not have any questions. And I know sometimes that happens because we, as strong interviewers, do a really great job kind of preemptively answering their questions. And that kind of can throw off the Q&A component of the interview. But what would you say are questions that you are expecting to be answering?
Yeah, that's a good question. And again, I've done a lot of interviews myself in both sides of the table, right? Like as the interviewee or the interviewer. And I think part of my hiring framework is that interviews are bi-directional, are a two-way street where we are interviewing candidates to make sure they're a good fit for our team. But the expectation also is that these candidates are interviewing to make sure we are their next best employer, next best manager, next best team they will join. So I would say the first red flag I can see is that someone doesn't have a question. Like if you don't have questions, if like as part of the interview, we really leave time, considerable amount of time at the end for questions. And if we give you that and you have no question for us, that's a little bit of a red flag showing either lack of interest or lack of preparation or lack of taking the opportunity seriously, lack of research, all of that. Like all these are signals. So that's still part of the interview. You should not dismiss that and say, yeah, no, I'm good. Thank you. It was great. I have no question. You should have questions no matter what. So you need to be prepared. You need to practice and you need to be ready. Some of the questions I expect, I would say are focused more on the vision, the strategy. Again, I'm really trying to talk about high level, high senior, very senior engineers and managers. You need to know that you are joining a team that has potential to grow a team where you will have a big impact. And I think I want to highlight this more because at this level of seniority, your job is to be a force multiplier, not necessarily like one addition to the team of 100 and it's now 101. Your job is to turn a team of 100 to executing at a level of 150 people. So really the focus will be on understanding the vision, understanding the culture, understanding the strategy, and seeing where you can really bring the best impact. So any question that might lead you to really better understand your positioning and the impact you might have, that would be the best question you ask.
Okay. And so when you do note that, one of the things that I think is like, okay, I can plug that into any like LLM and say, I'm going to be interviewing with the whatever level the hiring manager is. What are questions that I ask on like growth and impact? And then, the LLMs will do a great job of giving. I've tried it. They do give great questions to ask, but obviously they're generic. So is there any kind of, especially now with the use of AI, when the questions are very like vague, generic? I know the one that really irritates me is like if I've answered the question, like especially if I answered it 5 minutes ago, and I'm just like, this person has not heard a word that I've said. Now, granted, I understand that they can sometimes be nervous, but yeah, that's one that bothers me. The generic questions don't necessarily bother me, but I'm curious for, at the level that you're interviewing, I'm talking to them at the beginning of the process. You're talking to them more probably at the end of the process. They know enough about the opportunity, or in theory, they should, to be asking more specific questions. So yeah.
So, I mean, a few thoughts here. The first one is that I think the usage of AI is not in any way forbidden, right? Like it's perfectly fine that you prep and do some work with AI assisted interview prep. It's perfectly fine, but you should not just kind of read through what's in there and add no flavor to it, no personal touch to it. You need to do your own research, understanding what the business is about, what the team is facing, challenges. Especially like as an example, I do a lot of research when I interview. I do research about the leadership team and their background, the CEO, the future potential manager, and understand where they come from, and try to find good stories, good topics. If we had any sort of overlap in another company or another domain, kind of bring that and use it just to show personal touch to the questions. But the core, the foundation could be exactly the same, which is mainly, what is the vision, what challenges you're facing, what a successful candidate will look like. So AI or no AI, it still needs to be smart enough in showing interest and passion. And I think going back to the AI aspect, I mean, it's even better if you use AI because we maybe go deeper into the AI aspect later. One of my advice on how to use AI is to learn from AI. AI assists are there, but the idea is not to put your brain on the side and just use AI and whatever it says, you're going to copy paste that or say during the interview. But the idea is like you read and understand what AI suggested so you can learn this. So next time, maybe you don't need to use AI. So AI or not, I think you should show personality, show interest, and bring some creative, smart questions that are relevant, that on the other end, whoever is going to answer that will enjoy the process going and thinking to get you the answer, and not just be what's the successful candidate will look like, or like very basic stuff that I said a million times, or something, especially if it's something you can find on our website that at some point again could turn against you and become like a flag with someone who's like, well, you can find that information elsewhere. Like use your time with me to ask very good questions you can only get from me. And that's the idea. When it comes to when I go into the interviews, first or last, it really depends on the level of seniority and what we are hiring for and the stage of the company. I like to go early on because I need to kind of set the stage, and hopefully we get to talk about this later. I think hiring in this market today is like a sales process. It's like a sales operation. Yes, we're trying to make sure we're hiring the right people, but also at the end, you're doing a lot of selling, convincing, and showing a good picture, a good PR for the business, for you, for your team, to make sure you get the right candidates. Because you might be talking to a lot of good candidates, but you're not the only one. So selling is also part of that. And these few minutes at the end for questions are key for you to do that.
And when you're thinking about kind of, all of the interviews you've conducted, anything like kind of pop into your head, a specific candidate that did kind of like a remarkable, obviously like a memorable job of asking questions and what it was about that particular candidate and what they asked?
Yeah, I had a lot of good candidates. I was lucky enough, but also some, average. I think it's a good representation of the market anyway. I think the best candidates will ask you questions that will make you think, that will make you really start already partnering with them on a problem to solve. So they ask you questions that make you reflect and think and summarize in kind of it's like you are being interviewed, honestly. And that's the best thing. I mean, I enjoy these. Again, I'm not risking my job by maybe if I do a poor job answering that, but it makes me feel like, yes, it's really on point when it comes to my framework of a two-way street. It's really, I am interviewing them, they are interviewing me, they care, they're interested, they show kind of creativity and interest in pursuing this more seriously. And that pushed me a little bit into thinking. And if they have follow-up, again, maybe the ratio of time maybe could be like 80%. I'm asking question, 20% you're asking question. But at the end, it feels like that 20% they had at the end is as good and valuable as the 80% I was interviewing them. So I think these are the good questions. I don't have exact examples, honestly, for this, but definitely the best ones are the ones that will make me think and start talking to them as if they already work with me today.
There's that I need to come in with questions, whatever, a list of questions that aren't about you, or you can come into it as I want to get to know this person. I want to engage this person and like really understand what it would be like to partner and work with this person. And so I think that mindset, which you're talking about, of just those two different ways of, before you're even in the interview, of really thinking about how you are going to, what is the point of the question, is good. One thing that I talk to candidates a lot about, and the market is different now with layoffs, but 5 years ago when I was interviewing, predominantly I spent a lot of time talking to people who are not happy at work, because most of the people that I was interviewing were employed. There was something going wrong at work, and then they're talking to me about potential new opportunity. And so I try to encourage people to really think about what has made them unsuccessful or not happy in work environments. I've been in some not happy work environments. What could I have asked to have avoided accepting that job? And those are questions that can be very unique to one person versus another.
Yeah, I mean, again, the interview process is not a one-time thing. It's not a one interview. It's not a one data point. It's many. And I think one thing I encourage people who are going through interviews to do is to make sure they always ask, if they don't get already, the list of the people who they will be talking to, and then check them out on LinkedIn. Again, check for these overlaps, check for the topics, the projects, the expertise that might be relevant to ask questions about, and then understand their job at the company. They'll be their manager, a peer, or a direct report, or just a partner somewhere in another org. And then the best questions you can come up with at the end are relevant to that context, to who they are, to what they do, and also to the 30, 45 minutes, 60 minutes you had with them. So even if you come up, I mean, many times I prepared like many questions to go and ask people at the interviews, and then end up asking something completely different because of that context that was created in the previous 45 minutes. So that's where you can leverage all of these by becoming more context aware and really leverage that to ask the right questions. And again, the best thing you can get from candidates is really how much they want to make sure that this is a successful move for them and for the business. So that's where earlier I asked about impact. They really want to be able to assess that as they join, they will have that impact. But it's also not, it's very reasonable that they ask questions about the future of the company or the team or growth opportunities. I think some of the best questions they had were very, kind of feet on the ground, very realistic, honest, transparent about the situation. They'd read something. Maybe I work at a company that had a layoff, and then I was interviewing for a role, and they were asking about these layoffs, why they happened, what's the business, projections and all of that. I like these discussions. I go very honestly and open to the conversations and try to have exactly the same response and answer I will have now as they are being interviewed that would be exactly the same if they were working with me and reporting to me the next day. So there's nothing to hide. Obviously, stay very high level and but transparent and say things the way they are, because that's very important. They need to build that connection early on so they feel working with you later will be exactly that. I mean, the worst thing that can happen is you are selling a picture of yourself, the team, the companies that is not the reality. And then, as soon as they sign on and join and find a different reality, that's not going to be successful. That will make them unhappy, and definitely you lose them. You'll end up losing them, and you wasted everyone's time on this.
Yeah.
So I think that's what I think is a good, successful end of an interview when it comes to these questions is, take some risk asking questions that are more aware of the context that this company or team or manager is at, and show that you are very interested in that and understanding, because that impacts your future. But we don't ask from frustration or from being afraid that the future might not be bright at this company. Ask more to really assess the potential of you coming and having that growth. If that growth and impact is not, you don't see it happening, well, you need to assess that early on. Otherwise, as you said, you will end up in a place that might not be exactly what you're looking for.
Yeah. So on that layoff point, I want us to get a bit more of a sample of what's a good way and a bad way to do a question. So I get probably the most common would be, I see you've had layoffs in last year. How will I know that you're not going to have layoffs again? That's not a great question. It's not a red flag question, but how could that question be, I guess, I see you've had layoffs. What changes internally are happening that it makes sense to be growing the team now? Is a better way to ask that question.
Yeah, exactly. You can get to the end of your question in many ways, as long as you ask the right question. So if you're concerned about the history of layoffs or most recent layoff, you can really phrase it in a way that shows, interest in understanding what happened, so you can do the work to maybe project and imagine what could happen in the future. But asking directly, do you see more layoffs coming? That shows more fear than potential.
Right.
So for me, if I was interviewing for this role, I would be asking more okay, well, I looked into the news. You have you had just had the layoff round. Can you tell me more about that? What were the constraints or the environment for that? Yeah. And that's up to the person to really give you the reality as much as transparency possible, but then build up for the potential of the move, and honestly, every company out there is doing layoffs. It's not becoming a one-off, or it doesn't reflect necessarily lack of growth or an issue. So it's up also to the person who is handling this question to just make sure, explain what happened, business reasons, or strategic change, and give that perception of future is good and this is why we're hiring. Most of the time you can take this question, really turn it around to become more kind of energetic and positive about the future. So it's fair to ask these questions. It's just there's a good way to ask the same question and get the same outcomes you want.
So Glassdoor is an area that people get information. When someone brings up Glassdoor as an engineering leader, is that a, God, here we go? Or is that a, oh, good, I have the opportunity to clean up a potential misconception? How do you think about the Glassdoor type questions?
Yeah, as I said earlier, your job is not to cover realities or build a parallel reality where everything is green, everything is beautiful, and you join and find realities that are different. And vice versa. You don't wanna just say it is what it is, and kind of that's what people say on Glassdoor, while that's not really true. So again, this is where I do believe again and again that this is a two-way interview. You don't go to interview people if you don't have prepared and the kind of answers, or at least ability to tackle and address these questions that are real. So in my opinion, the best answer will be something, again, that is honest, transparent as much as possible. Again, there are many things you cannot say on an interview at that time, but give that perception of honesty, clarity, and clarify that some of these voices are real and we are growing and learning. Or really, it depends on what kind of feedback you see on Glassdoor, but at least be realistic and honest about this. Otherwise, again, you're breaking one of the rules, which might lead to disappointment or misfit, at the end of the day, they will join, they will find that reality being wrong and will end up leaving. And as a manager or as a hiring manager, you will end up losing this resource that you spent time and money resources interviewing for. So it's very important to keep these things grounded.
So, okay, but the kind of that's your approach to how you would answer the question. But when you get the question, what are your thoughts about it, like on the candidate? Are you like, oh, good, they're looking things up, they're interested, they're trying to learn about us as a company, they're trying to make sure this is a fit? Or is it like, oh, they're just drudging in all of the bad news?
Again, it really depends on how the question was asked.
Okay.
There are ways, there is a tone, there is a format, there is a phrasing you can say to just be, again, very intelligent about the way you ask your question. All you need at the end of the day is the information. But to tell you, honestly, the truth, I value that. I value people who do research. I value people who look into things, no matter, not dig into like dirt or something, but they do their research. And this is coming from personal experiences that, where I joined companies or maybe did interviews or was impressed with things. And then I learned that I might have took some time to read some reviews or look at the news or just go to Glassdoor that could have a little bit balanced my opinions, good or bad. So doing the research is something I really value and appreciate from candidates. But where flags might go one way or the other is how you ask, is what is your intent by asking? Are you trying to put me in a tough spot and like telling me, but listen, like you said all these great things, but when I go to Glassdoor, I see all of these bad things? Or are you really trying to understand? Right. You can have Glassdoor is, again, I guess, a good representation of what's out there, but could it take you different directions, and it's very important to balance opinions out.
Which is an interesting, so kind of highlighting on the red flag. So really, like, the red flag isn't so much the question itself, it's more, is this someone that I would want to work with? I just experienced that the other week. I gave some information about an opportunity I was helping to hire for, and the tone of the candidate just got, like, the experience of the interview became draining because they got so caught up in something that they weren't sure about that I had shared with them that it became almost like depressing, the energy in the interview. And so while their concern was a valid concern, I didn't feel confident in moving them forward as a candidate because the energy of them during that interview was so low and kind of downing everything that I wouldn't feel comfortable sharing them with a hiring manager. So I think that these questions, it's more about the kind of the energy around the question. Like, are they coming from a place of fear? Are they coming from like a place of like they're very combative? Or, like, are they giving me signs that as a team member, they may be a very difficult person to work with? So would you say the red flag are oftentimes more about they're giving me indicators that they would be a difficult team member than it is that they're asking a difficult question?
100%. Candidates don't know most of the time that when they ask questions, they're already giving up signals to the other person. So the question is not necessarily just to get the answers. Sometimes it's also representing or reflecting a lot of signals to the other person. So I can give you very tangible questions here. So I agree with you on the mood or the energy. You can have an interview that went through different aspects of questions, and then when you start giving them time for them to ask questions, they go into this low energy, depressive, kind of questionnaire about things. Some of the most senior people also go and ask you questions just so they show that they were right before, or just to highlight some of their past experiences. So in my opinion, no question is a bad question. Every question is good. It's just how you say it, when you say it, and what other questions you ask. If you go on a streak of like 5 questions that are demoralizing, depressing, and all negative, like, I looked this up on Glassdoor, I learned from another person this, you went through that, your business, it's like, are you like, it's going to be really tough to, as you said, turn you around, like turn things around and go to on the positive side of things. So in a short 5 to 10 minutes of questions, you might have opinions that beat the 60, the 45 minutes you had early on with them. Even if they were capable technically in soft and hard skills, the way they were asking these questions you might start asking yourself, am I really going to enjoy working with these people? So again, you might have a list of 20 questions. You really need to pick your questions right and balance things. You can ask a question about layoffs or business opportunities of future and all of that, showing some interest in understanding the business trajectory, but not phrase it in a way like, oh, convince me that the business will grow.
Yeah. Right.
Or like, yeah, all based on the history. Or they sometimes, again, ask you questions so they can answer their own question. So they ask you something, they wait for you to be done, and then they say, you know what, I did this way in the past. Especially, again, we're talking about senior people, directors, they get into early kind of showcasing and even at some point like competition, showing you that they have skills similar to yours. So you start really think that they're good. They are like peers, yes, they report. You'll be like lucky to hire them. In fact, it's not. It's really show some flags about like, oh, they talk a lot. They want to, put themselves more on the spotlight, or they are really hard to turn around when things go bad. And when we focus more, when you know where you are on a stage as a company, if you're a startup, if you're looking for leaders, if you're looking for people to kind of manage ambiguity and like tough times, these are already red flags. Like, no, I need people who can really excited about the challenges, excited about turning things around, finding opportunities in every challenge. So the questions are so important, but the material of the question is not the problem. The problem is like everything around it, like how you say it, when you say it, and what you're trying to get out of the question you're asking.
Yeah, I think of when you hit on that, I am asking most of the questions when I interview. And another thing that drives me nuts is when people don't answer the question that I ask, and I'll stop them and I'll say, no, that's not the question I asked. This is the question that I asked. And I know it drives candidates crazy, but I hate the spend 5 minutes telling me about yourself. Like, I don't ask that question, but most candidates anticipate that. And so they just want to do that in my interview. And then I try to stop them, and sometimes they won't be stopped. And like, you automatically fail the interview because to me, everything that you're saying doesn't matter. The fact that you're not listening to anything that I've said, I've tried to redirect you, and you're not listening, makes me pretty confident that your communication skills are problematic. And, unless a hiring manager tells me I don't care about their communication skills, which I don't think has ever happened, I'm not going to move them forward. So that's, and I think, some of what you're touching on is ego, that if everything feels like, I recently had another candidate who kind of name dropped that they had worked at a FANG company so much during the interview that I started anticipating it. Like, I was like, okay, when are they going to say that FANG company again? And yeah. And I was just like, it gives you an ego concern. And typically, when we're coming from a place of like ego and all of whatever the emotional complexity that comes with that oftentimes isn't a good indicator of strong teammate. So we started this conversation really kind of high level IC. I think probably everything that we talked about is relevant for manager and director, but I do think that there are questions that, people managers should be talking to you about that we haven't addressed yet. So let's dig into that a little.
Sure. Yeah.
So on the people manager side of things, can you think of like a story when somebody like kind of asked some questions that you thought, oh my God, this person is going to be a horrible people manager, but was them asking you questions? Or very misaligned with how you think and your philosophy around people management is?
100%. I mean, I can recall one scenario. It's not one question. It's like throughout the whole interview.
Yeah.
Some people managers or, senior managers, directors of engineering, these are these are roles you get to after you practice the craft of software engineering for some time. Most of the time, like I expect these roles to be technical, so people have been there, did the work, so they know what it is. They used to be a player, then now they're gonna get into the coaching kind of spot. I think one of the biggest red flags that I have seen before when it comes to questions that are asked or like discussions or topics you go to is I would say, the lack of empathy to the IC role as they are turning into a manager role. So they become more and more like thinking that manager is necessarily a higher rank than an IC. It's, because I did this for this many years, because I can earned my spot as a manager, as a director, or as a leader. Like I'm gonna, build teams. I'm gonna tell them what to do. I will watch for their performance, and they will start benchmarking things to themselves. Really trying to look like, well, I expect engineers the same way I grew as an engineer, and to get to staff and principal, I worked hard. So I worked nights and weekends. I did this. I get my team to that same level of standards and bar. And anyone who doesn't meet that bar will be in trouble. And that kind of shows you kind of signals of really people bringing their own framework of success, their own definition of success. And I can guarantee you they will try to apply to everyone they work with or in their org. So they will have their own vision, their own perception to how you make it as an IC and try to apply to everyone else.
Right. So they have kind of it's a bit their way is the right way.
Yeah. It's their way. Oh, yeah. Otherwise, it's not going to work. Yeah. There's no other way to be successful unless you do what I tell you and go follow my path.
Okay. Now, how does that come out in a question?
So because some of the key questions when you ask a manager or like a leader is like, how would you manage your team? How would you manage low performer? How would you really kind of work on making sure you have these kind of opportunities to grow your team as a whole?
But that's you asking them.
Yeah.
Right. So I'm wondering when they're asking you, because I can definitely see how you could get those things when you're asking them. But when they're asking you questions, how,
Yeah. I get it. I get it now. That might end up being, questions, when they ask about the team they will be managing. How big is the team?
Okay.
How many senior staff, principal engineers they have? Tell me more about this. They might also ask you a question if you come late in the interview process and they are ready to talk to some engineers that might manage in the future, and they start sharing feedback and they say, oh, I like this but not that, and tell me more about how long they have been in the company. So they start giving you signals that they are very critical to everyone's journey to get there, and they believe that I feel like it's not going to work. And they start, before even they start the job, they start giving you some sort of like a strategy on how to shift things. So, and that's I think one of the biggest challenges when it comes to hiring a manager is they come to disrupt things almost immediately versus, really spending time to learn about the culture, learn about the people, and then really do the tweaks and the moves that are needed to make it more successful. So that kind of brings to the surface some concerns of like, okay, well, this is someone who kind of might be hard to work with because they will disrupt the whole thing immediately. Sometimes you need that, by the way. Let's be.
I mean, that's the thing. And I get director hiring. I really wish everybody was just honest. And low performing team is very complicated because I know good management can transform a low performing team into a high performing team. But perceptions they've got a clean house and this team sucks. Ideally, there is this transparency and alignment. Hey, the team is this, and how the VP wants the team handled and how the engineering manager wants the team handled is aligned. What are things that have stood out to you as this is a people manager that I can feel excited about? Yeah,
I think most of the time, because people management is very subjective. It's very nuanced. Everyone has their own frameworks. You cannot, this is something I talked about earlier. Like I don't have a specific definition of success that I share with everyone and say, okay, well, this is how you and my team will be successful. Just follow this. It's not my story. It's not anyone's story. Everyone has their own journey, and everyone's success is different. So I work with these, reporting managers or reporting ICs to really define that. Let them define most of it. What is success for you? And together, based on my experience and based on my role, we tweak it to make sure it works. And for me, during interviews, what shows more kind of a good fit and maybe future good alignment are two things. One is that these frameworks are as close as possible to each other. My framework of management and your framework of management. If I start hearing the same language, the same ideas and concept, it makes me feel comfortable that we'll definitely work together really well. But that's not enough. I don't want to have another copy of me doing the work. I don't want to have someone who's just, doesn't bring any added value. It's more headcount.
Yeah, one thing I want to point on that, because I've talked to directors of engineering when they're about interviewing. Like in one of my episodes, I talked to someone that I used to work with, Steven, about that. And he noted how difficult it was interviewing for director of engineering roles because he didn't know what the VP or CTO wanted. And so it was hard for him to speak to that. So what are your, from the other side, your thoughts on that?
So that's where all the magic happens, is they need to be able to assess how they will fit in this role, how it's going to work for them reporting to their manager. And again, this is where I think in my position as an example, I really look for other complementary skill sets, other tools, other backgrounds that will really complement my leadership and my feeling that this team is under good leadership and we can together as a group really believe in this kind of very vertical hierarchy where, I lead these teams, I delegate all the work. No, we work as partners as much as possible. So if I have someone who has more experience with different areas, either in managing teams, performance, or scaling teams, and I don't have these skills, I would really love to marry these two and have the power. So this is something that is very important, especially in the technical skills.
Okay.
Managers, most of the time, when they go into the management position and later leadership positions, they don't have that kind of breadth of expertise. You can never find a manager who's good at AI, mobile web, backend data engineering, and security. That doesn't exist. So on the technical skills, most of the time, you'd rather complement your teams with people who have more experiences, and that together you have more deeper kind of knowledge about these different aspects. Again, sometimes you might hire managers for specific verticals, like a director of engineering for data, for security, but a lot of other times you have your managers for pods and for teams and directors for business units and units that you just want to make sure they have good leadership in place and you work on performance at that kind of granular level. So complementarity and skills, especially technical, but also soft skills if needed, is very key. And that comes from an acknowledgement from you as a leader, as a VP of engineering, that you're not perfect. You don't know everything. You cannot manage anything. You cannot fix everything. So having that support and building a team that can do that and be, again, that kind of multiplication factor as a whole is key. So I would recommend to...
that I do have with that, because one of my last director hires, now granted, I guess it was a vertical hire. So I was hiring him to build a data team. I talked to so many really great engineering leaders who they didn't have the technical, they'd done this with data, but really, whatever. They really spent more time managing a DevOps team or more time doing this, and so we found someone who had that strong data piece, but it was very clear the whole time in the process of hiring that role that that's what we wanted. And it might have even been titled senior director of data engineering at the title of the role. I don't recall exactly, but I'm curious because what you're saying, is there have you done hiring where it's more flexible in that, well, there's, we don't have expertise in mobile front end or DevOps in our engineering leadership. So let's talk to people. And ideally, one of the people that fits our engineering leadership philosophy and everything like that also brings one of those three things. Has that
happens a lot in startups? So when you are hiring in a startup, you cannot afford to hire someone who's very vertical, very expert in one area and really not able to take on other things, or it's going to take a lot of time. So you look for more like a triangle shape with like exposure to more things, deeply knowledgeable about a few things. If you take that kind of needle stick that is not flexible to move around, that's risky. So in startups, you see a lot of this hiring where, yes, your next immediate focus is data. So you hire someone with data expertise. But if you have someone who has other overlaps and other expertise, you'd prioritize that more. It's different in bigger scale companies, maybe medium sized to enterprise companies where you really need that kind of expertise. But this is more on the technical aspect. There is also and I said this earlier without going too much into details. I think you need to marry people management skills and technical skills. Again, sometimes a lot of managers get into management just because they did a great job as an IC. They go into there, and sometimes they might be missing the people management, kind of coaching and mentorship that is needed for them to be able to scale these teams, to worry about performance, or to really build the framework of success that is different from it's my way, otherwise you're not productive. And that's one of the challenges you might see because, sometimes, especially in startups, people get in these higher levels very quickly just because they did some, deliverables on key projects. They help the company raise money.
The CTO really likes them. And so they
exactly.
Yeah.
And I have seen a lot of like the opposite way in the most recent years where you hear a lot of like co-founder, engineer, CTO stepping back and saying, I want to do just that. And this company is hiring for like a real VP of engineering, a real CTO who can do strategy, execution, performance management, and the technical aspect. So it's very important to look at this kind of a three-dimensional, how deep you are technically capable, what kind of breadth they have, but also look at the people management side of things, because together all these things will give you the right ideal candidate. But that candidate and what you're looking for depends on where you are in your stage, how big is your company, what you're looking for to achieve long-term success or short-term success. And that's where you can see more of these generic management roles, director of engineering. Yeah, data now, but later I wanted to do other things. And we have a long roadmap that is coming. And with how fast startups go, that is very important to assess early on.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. So this has been a really great conversation. I hope to have future conversations with you about all things like startup and hiring. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate that conversation we had and looking forward for future times. So thank you.